Welcome to the Rap Soul Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of music that moves our hearts and gets our feet tapping. This is the intersection of rap and soul music from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We appreciate you for listening. Share this podcast with a friend or family member who loves music as much as you do. The podcast is hosted by 12 Kyle. Next up, the Rap Soul Podcast.
We'd heard how bad it was, but until you really, get into the music, you don't really know how bad it was as far as Bloods and Crips, where it was to the point where, it really was about colors. You couldn't go wearing red anywhere if you weren't in a Blood neighborhood, and literally and figuratively wearing the wrong color could get you killed. Welcome to another edition of the Rap Soul Podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I want to thank you all for tuning in as you do each and every week. Again, this is the Rap Soul Podcast. This is the intersection where we have discussions about music and artists from the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s when it comes to rap, hip hop, soul, and R&B. Simply put, folks, this is the best music podcast that you have never heard until right now. Shout out to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Man, check this out. So the other day, I know this is going to sound strange to you, but the other day, it was June 7th at the time of this recording. And something interesting happened on June 7th, 1991. That was the day that I graduated from high school. That's right. It's been 35 years. I know I don't look like I graduated 35 years ago, and I know I don't sound like someone who graduated 35 years ago, but I did. I'm old and washed, but that's beside the point. What it made me think about was, as I started thinking about the music that came out that particular year, I asked myself, what was the greatest album that came out the year that we came out of high school in 1991? And I thought about hip hop, and I thought about R&B. R&B we'll come back to a little later in another episode. But when I think about hip hop, it was 35 years ago, but personally, I think the greatest album to come out that year as far as hip hop is concerned, or at least my favorite, would be none other than Ice Cube's Death Certificate. Now, this album was released on October 29th, 1991. I graduated, again, June 7th, 1991. So the album was released same calendar year that I graduated, but by October, I had already enrolled and was on the campus of the greatest HBCU in the world, South Carolina State University. Shout out to King Jern from Pod and Saved Our Marriage. So yeah, I'm a freshman at the time, but again, that's my year that I graduated from high school, 1991. And so Death Certificate comes out, and for me, it was a mind-blowing album for a couple of reasons, and I'll get into it in just a second. But more importantly, I think this is a very essential album because this album it has a theme. And the album is split in two. The album is politically charged. It is racially charged. It is, in my opinion, probably the blackest hip hop album we had up until that point. And to be honest, I don't necessarily know that we'll ever have a hip hop album be this black. I mean, it was blackety black, but it perfectly captured the socio-political atmosphere that we were in 1991, and a lot of the systematic and economic struggles that happened in Los Angeles, where Ice Cube is from, at that particular time. Now, if you're familiar with history, March 3rd of 1991 was the infamous beating of a motorist by the name of Rodney King at the hands of the LAPD. And so I think that backdrop with what Ice Cube and his peers and people like me had experienced as far as police brutality, being harassed by the police, more specifically the LAPD. Now, I wasn't in LA at the time, but I'd been racially profiled by the police before. And of course, Ice Cube his history as far as making political songs like Fuck the Police with NWA. It goes back to 1988. That being said, I think the backdrop of this album probably starts somewhere around there, somewhere around that time of 1991 at the Rodney King beating. And what was interesting was the common theme, not just in Ice Cube's community, but in my community in Florence, South Carolina, was that, okay, we knew that police brutality existed, but okay, now they caught them on tape. There's no way that these cops are going to get away with beating an unarmed motorist on tape. Well, if you follow history, you know what happened. All 4 cops were acquitted the following year, in 1992, April of 1992, and thus the LA riots came right after that, and which is interesting because this album is kind of a precursor to the LA riots. Almost everything that Ice Cube talked about on this album, we saw it play out, in less than a year in the LA riots. But this album is a concept album, but the structure is incredible because, again, the album is split into 2. There is side A, shout out to A sides and B sides from back in the day. But side A is called the Death Side. And it is, the subplot is where we are today, the systematic decay and street life of 1991. And then side B is called the life side, where we need to go. We need to get to a political awakening, as well as Ice Cube offers some solutions as to how we get to that point. But it is a flawless album. It is one that I still listen to this day. It's up for debate if it's his best album. It really just depends on who you ask and when you ask. Someone like me who's a huge Ice Cube fan, his albums, America's Most Wanted and Death Certificate, for me are like splitting hairs. It really just depends on what day you ask me which is the better album. But again, this album is a concept album. So let's talk a little bit about the Death Side. The Death Side is 11 tracks, and Ice Cube wastes no time, gets right to it as he does on all of his albums. But what it did was it offered a grim reality of the self-destruction and the systematic traps that were right there in South Central Los Angeles. You have a bunch of people in an area where there really isn't a lot of economic growth. You had the white flight of people who used to live in LA in those particular neighborhoods moved out to the suburbs. You get a concentration of people there. There's not a lot of opportunity for jobs and employment. And then you throw in drugs and you throw in guns and then you create gangs. And so there was a systematic failure in those neighborhoods, not just South Central, but the neighborhoods in that area in which Ice Cube was talking about. But it talks about how the structural oppression breeds poverty, And then when you have structural oppression across the board, there's not really a lot of hope for any type of hope, because at this point, you only have a couple of ways to get out, and none of that is celebrated or anything like that. You're not pushed to get out. You're pushed to kind of stay in this same cocoon and basically be in this same circle or rat race, if you will, for your life, however long your life is. But I mean, he had some standout tracks. I'm not going to go through all the tracks, but I mean, like just a few. Alive on Arrival as a skit, just talking about how, when you're born, you're born into those circumstances. No matter how much money you have, you're born into those circumstances and you are pretty much dead on arrival once you get here. But it's a narrative of, tracking a young victim of a gang shootout who slowly bleeds to death in a hospital room while waiting on to get help. And, the police are questioning him. That's a standout track. A Bird in the Hand. It's a brilliant critique of Reaganomics. It basically tracks a young father who's forced to sell crack because, he could either sell crack or he could get a low wage minimum minimum wage job or entry level jobs don't pay enough to support life that he has or any lives that he's created, plus the bare necessities. One of my favorite tracks, My Summer Vacation, a gritty story about how, in the community, it wasn't enough to just sell dope and gangbang in your hood. Yet they took it east. So they went to St. Louis and they set up shop and to expand their drug trade. And, no matter how much they thought it was going to be profitable, the famous line is, he said, well, a drive-by in Missouri, they get shot at. And so they found out quickly that in that story, no matter where you are, things are going to happen. And so you try to escape the poverty of LA only to go to St. Louis to find out there's ghettos in St. Louis as well. Those are just a couple of the standout tracks that I love. And then you flip it to the life side. The life side is tracks 12 through 20. So in essence, this is a double album. And this side of the album shifts the theme from being the struggle to where we need to go as far as Black nationalism, the political awakening you need to have. Ice Cube actually offers some solutions at the time he was aligned with the Nation of Islam. I don't know that Ice Cube was ever a member of the Nation of Islam, but I'm almost positive that he was aligned with them. In fact, the late Dr. Khalid Muhammad actually is on the album. If you don't know about Dr. Khalid Muhammad, look him up. But even having him on there and Ice Cube being aligned with the Nation of Islam and subsequently Minister Louis Farrakhan, that created a lot of controversy. It was not smiled upon by the masses. And I remember Ice Cube, having to come out and talk about this album, and he didn't hold his tongue. He spoke very vividly as to what he thought, why he thought it, and did not make any apologies for the stance that he took on this album when it came to Black nationalism and any and everything in between, and being supported by the Nation of Islam. So it is a very, very it's a very, very dope story. It's very prophetic. I love this album, and this is one of the albums where when I listen to it, I never just listen to one track. It's always all the way through. But, and I've got several favorite songs on this album, on this side of the album. Just to name a few, I Want to Kill Sam. It's a scathing metaphor as to Ice Cube wanting to address the elephant in the room, which is Uncle Sam, how we as Black people are done in this country. He talked about not just slavery, but how Black men were forced to go into the military and, go off to war and not come home to be celebrated as war heroes, but to be treated like second-class citizens. And then another song, Colorblind, where he talks about, the rivalry, the bloodshed between the Bloods and the Crips. A very eye-opening song, particularly for those of us who had never been to South Central or LA in particular. We'd heard how bad it was, but until you really, get into the music, you don't really know how bad it was as far as Bloods and Crips, where, it was to the point where, it really was about colors. You couldn't go wearing red anywhere if you weren't in a Crip in a Blood neighborhood. Couldn't be a Crip in a Blood neighborhood. And literally and figuratively, wearing the wrong color could get you killed. But in the song, he also talked about a truce and talking about how if the Bloods and Crips came together, they could unite and be a very, very powerful unit. And I thought that was very key in that song. But he just opens you up to a lot of different ideas and concepts. This album was masterfully produced by Sir Jinx, DJ Pooh and the Boogeyman, which was a contrast from his previous album, America's Most Wanted, which was produced by the Bomb Squad in New York. So he kept it, on the West Coast. It was heavy P-Funk sampling. He had some dope skits, and everything kind of tied together. This album, again, was not without controversy. Had a song about Black Korea. And in fact, that was the name of the song, called Black Korea. It was about the racial tension between Black people and Koreans in LA, and particularly Korean store owners. We saw that play out with violence against Latasha Harlins, the young teenager who was killed in LA back in that time, and several other instances where it was really a clash between the Blacks and Koreans, because a lot of Black people felt as if, okay, hey, you have these Korean people in our neighborhood with stores in our neighborhood, and then they treat us like second class citizens, and they're constantly making money off of us, our dollar, but we're treated like crap. True to the Game was another song that created a lot of controversy. That song had me and my friends guessing who he was talking about. There was a video for it, and in the video and in the song, he talks about Black artists who crossed over to white audiences, abandoning their roots. And it was a fair criticism, because it was starting to happen a lot more than we were used to, because at this particular time in the early 90s, money was starting to come into rap or hip hop. And so there was an influx of artists who, were kind of looking at the charts. In the video, I remember distinctly, I think it was DJ Pooh that was playing a caricature that appeared to be MC Hammer. As far as I know, Ice Cube and Hammer have always been cool. But in the video, it looked like, that he was talking about Hammer. I don't know. I'd never heard of any beef between the two, but that song is very apropos, I think, because, there were some artists who weren't true to the game. The biggest song that probably caused the biggest controversy was the last song on the album, called No Vaseline. Venomous diss track for his former bandmates NWA, where Ice Cube criticized NWA, their manager Jerry Heller. Personally, I think it's the greatest diss song ever. Again, personally, I'm not arguing with you, but it's the greatest diss song I've ever heard. And technically, there was never a response to Ice Cube's diss. But he had a reason and had reasons to vent, and he put it out on wax, and NWA, didn't respond. All in all, man, this album was heralded as a classic, and it's did it get 5? I think it got 5 mics in the source. It was and still is phenomenal. And again, it's not something that I veered away from. I still listen to this album to this day. When I look at the landscape of albums that came out in 1991, as far as hip hop is concerned, there were some dope albums. There were some really, really dope albums. I'm not going to run down the list of them, but for me and my money, I think Death Certificate was the greatest hip hop album that came out the year that I graduated. So, what I would say to my fellow podcasters who want to remix this or talk about it, tell us the year that you graduated. What year did you graduate? And what was the greatest hip hop album to come out that particular year that you graduated? Again, 1991 for me was a great year. It was the year that I graduated from high school. It was the year that I enrolled at South Carolina State University. This album, Death Certificate, got a lot of play in my Nissan Sentra. It got a lot of play in my dorm room, and it still gets play in my car to this day. So salute to Ice Cube. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the Rap Soul Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We drop new episodes every Thursday. Also, don't forget about the flagship station, the 12 Kyle Podcast. We drop new episodes there every Thursday as well. And don't forget about the website. Please don't forget about the website. It is the rapsoulpodcast.riverside.com. And also the 12 Kyle Podcast.riverside.com. There you can find the link of every episode, and you can get to Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you want to consume it, or you can consume it on the website. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the Rap Soul Podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. This concludes the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Rap Soul Podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Follow the podcast on social media. And feel free to continue this discussion on our Reddit page. More importantly, share this podcast with a friend or family member who loves music as much as you do. Until next time, 5,000.